Greetings and salutations, everyone. I hope everyone is doing well today. Today I've got an assortment of encounters that I'm looking forward to sharing with you. One from a subscriber. She reached out a couple days ago and shared her co-worker's encounter that he had a couple of years back. Hopefully, when he gets back to the area that he resides in, he will be coming on and sharing that encounter with us. But she is Japanese, and she had mentioned that she had some stuff that she wanted to share native to her culture. I jumped at it. I also have some other encounters after that, too. But before that, the links. As you know, I rely on my Patreon, my PayPal, and my merch to help this channel to continue to grow and go. All of those links are in the description below. I also have a second channel for creepypasta, fan fiction, and scary voice acting. Stories that, well, they just don't fit on this channel. Now, if that's anything that you're into, follow that link and give those stories a listen. You may just like what you hear. Now, I've taken enough of your time, everyone. Let's get on with today's upload. Shall we? Today's first part of the upload is the subscriber submission. I have a bit of time before I need to report to my post, so I will begin by telling you some Japanese history and the legend of the Tisachi Gumo. It may help put my son's experiences in some context. Most of the world does not know that there is more than one race in Japan. The modern Japanese that we are familiar with in the United States, we call Yawoi. My ancestors are called Joman. We look different than a Yawoi, in that we are taller with a longer arm and leg length to height ratio, and our eyes are different in that we have a fold in our lid, high cheekbones, and square jawlines. We are the indigenous people of Japan. The Yawoi, which are the dominant race of Japan now, called us Tisachi Gumo, earth spider, as a derogatory term. The Japanese today tell of a monster that dwelled in Japan when they came to the islands. They still tell of that monster called the Tisachi Gumo, which appears as a beautiful woman or a fairy-like child, but its other form is that of a giant hairy spider with stripes. The legends say Tisachi Gumo would invite the men into their home, feed them, and offer them shelter. The men would then fall ill, and the Tisachi Gumo, in human form, would continue to care for the victim as they grew weaker over days or weeks. In one account, the warrior awoke in delirium and found himself in a room covered with thick web. He struck out and wounded the monster, causing it to flee. He and his men followed the blood trail to the cave and discovered the body of the giant spider. In other tales, the Tisachi Gumo is spared and swore to serve the warrior and be bound till they have saved that warrior 3 times. The stories often having the Tisachi Gumo traveling and battling in human form, killing other demons in order to keep their warrior safe. In one story, the Kitsune, who is a fox in man, seeing the Tisachi Gumo humbled by a human, agrees to also help, just for the enjoyment of watching a Tisachi Gumo in service to a man. By the Yawoi, or modern Japanese, generally hunted the Joman, or Tisachi Gumo people, as shape-shifting spider demons, until their numbers were greatly reduced. They finally bowed to the Emperor Kyoko and swore to the Emperor. Somehow my family became a Japanese noble family and were assigned to be judges and protectors for the emperor, till my grandfather passed the title to his younger brother. Of course, neither I nor my father turn into a spider or eat people, and my children were not told of our ancestry or the legends till my son started seeing things. It began when he was a toddler. He would wake up screaming and say, "They are looking at me through the window. They are trying to get into the house." I assumed he was having night terrors. But when he was 9, he began seeing things more frequently in the yard. By this time, he was old enough to describe it better. He said it was all black, and with long arms and legs like a spider. But it was as big as a man, and had a human torso. He couldn't see any facial features in the dark, except that it was also hairy. He saw its long spider-like arms come over the brick wall and slide its body up and over it. It was inside the yard, still clinging to the wall. He then began to hear a whispering voice, but couldn't understand the words. What I didn't realize at the time was that his older brother and sister both had dreams in which they were approached by a spider-like creature with a human face. They described it as having a human face, but the body was too long, and the arms and legs looked like skinny insect. Of course, they were terrified to find out that they were all seeing or dreaming the same thing. I decided to tell them the legend of the Tisachigumo, if only to ease their fear. I told them their ancestors had been hunted as spider demons, but that the indigenous Japanese hunted with poison-tip arrows, but were in fact peaceful and honored everything in nature, from animals to rocks and streams, even that which they ate. In the traditional beliefs, our ancestors didn't just die and go away. They traveled back and forth, watching over their family and protect them. I have no proof that those ancestral legends are true, and I don't know if what my son saw had anything to do with those legends, but he sleeps well enough now. Another interesting and perhaps ironic fact is that St. Xavier went to Japan and was the first person in Japan to be converted to Christianity and be baptized, was from our family, and subsequently 5 of his descendants were burned alive rather than renounce their faith or turn to Christian missionaries. If you look up St. Leonardus or Sebastian Kimura, the history of their martyrdom is still preserved. We have remained Christian since the 1500s. The irony is that the very people hunted as demons were the first to be baptized or die for their faith in Japan. I know it's not a Dogman, but it's one of our shapeshifters. I wish you and your family a safe and peaceful night. That was truly interesting and cool. First, I apologize if I annihilated any of the ancient dialect. But I love learning about other cultures and their legends. Native American legends are, by far one of my favorite. But then you've got Japanese legends. You've got the Filipino legends where they have that shape-shifting witch that steals babies. There's just a ton. I mean, it's and these legends are just, they're there for a reason, because every kind of myth or legend stems from something that was true or feared by those indigenous people. Like Native Americans talked of, the Sasquatch. They talked about Dogman. It's just very interesting. So That was cool, and I truly, truly appreciate you sharing that with us. Today's second part of the upload is a encounter from Red River, Texas, 1982. My cousin and I were playing outside. It was near dark. We were told to go find my uncle. He was working out in a pasture that was cleared for cattle, so we jumped the fence to go find him. My cousin said, "There he is," so we started toward him. We were about 50 feet from him when we realized that was not our uncle. It was a hairy creature about 6.5 feet tall. It turned around and looked at us, grunted, and ran toward the woods. It stepped over the fence and disappeared. We screamed as it turned. Our uncle heard us scream and came from the nearby barn. He thought we were making it up, of course. That was until 8 months later, in December of 1983. We had another encounter. It was a Saturday night, and we were going to town to see a movie. Rain and sleet had been falling for most of the day. We lived back off the main road and had to travel logging roads to the highway. About 1,000 yards from our driveway, my aunt suddenly screamed. We looked up in time to see it. It crossed the road right in front of us. It jumped across a ditch on the side of the road and disappeared into the woods. In the headlights, the color of the animal was that of a brown bear. It was covered in hair. The hair was not very long. There were missing patches of hair on its arms and legs. Again, it seemed to be about 6.5 feet tall, kind of sloped up the back. We heard no sound as it crossed. Evangeline Parish, Louisiana. It was about 9:45 or so that evening. I was sitting on a porch swing. The moon was very bright that night, and I was watching a couple rabbits in the yard. My dog was at my feet. All at once, this foul, putrid odor came up. At this point, my dog stood, but not making a sound. At first, I thought my septic system had backed up, but then my dog started doing something I had never heard him do. He was whining, but at the same time trying to growl. I looked in the direction he was facing and could see something standing at the edge of the thicket. I told the dog to catch it, but he didn't move. This, too, was something he had never done. I watched as this thing crouched down and stayed put for about 2 minutes, then slowly turned, still crouched over, and started across the field. This thing moved just like a man walking crouched. I've seen numerous bear in the wild, and this was not a bear. It made its way across the field to the fence row, about 150 yards on 2 feet. I have never seen a bear do that. At that point, I went inside, got my headlight and my rifle, and started across the field with my dog. The whole way he's whining and underfoot. At about 50 yards from the fence row, I stopped and shined my light. What I saw was unlike anything I had ever seen before. Whatever this was had the strangest colored eyes. They were translucent blue. I saw them just above the fence, but couldn't make out the body because the fence was overgrown with briars and honeysuckle. This thing started moving up and down the row, about 10 yards in both directions, and stood up. It was about 2 feet taller than the fence. This was a typical 5-foot farm fence. At that point, not knowing what I was facing, and the fact my dog was still whining and kept trying to go back to the house, I decided to go back myself and leave whatever this was alone. Today's fourth part of the upload, Parker, Texas. My girlfriend and I were parking at the edge of a creek flowing into the back of a lake. It was dark, and under cover of the trees where we were parked, you couldn't see your hand in front of your face. We had all windows cracked a little, and we were in the back seat of the car when we heard something out of the ordinary. We had been there before, so we knew the usual night sounds in the area. An owl lived in a big tree nearby and hooted all the time. The hill in front of the car went down to a swamp with a creek in the middle going to the lake. There were cricket and frog and locusts all making their normal sounds that night. But we heard something coming through the leaves in the bottoms. It sounded like it was heading toward our car. I've spent a lot of time in the woods hunting, fishing, and trapping, growing up, so I don't get spooked too easy. At first I thought it was a cow, but then we noticed all the night sounds were gone. No frog, cricket, the owl. Everything was dead quiet except the footsteps. They were on 2 feet, a step and a drag step, like it had a hurt foot or something. Then, being a kid, I thought of all the horror movies I had watched and figured it was a guy who jumped the train and was coming to kill us and take our car. As the steps got closer, I got really bugged. It was coming up the hill right at the car. Finally, after what I thought was an eternity, I flew over the front seat and started the car. The only problem was it was a new car she had just bought, and I never drove it. She was screaming about dying or something when I threw it in reverse and stomped the gas. I was there before and knew the road opened up behind me, so as I was going backwards, I hit the light switch. This was a big mistake because it turned out to be the cigarette lighter. As soon as we came out of the tree cover, we got some moonlight and I found the headlight switch. This all happened really quick, but I looked up and there was this animal leaping over the hill going into the creek. It was really wide at the shoulders and almost no neck. I thought at first it was a bear, but there were not any bears in this area. I saw a big brownish black creature running through the trees. I saw 2 shoulders and the back of the head going between 2 trees. Later measured to be about 4.5 feet apart. It covered between them very easily. I asked my girlfriend if she saw it. She said she saw a brown spot in the lights like a bear on 2 legs. I think the car scared it off, so we went to town for help. After we got more people, trucks with lights and some equipment, we came back. We left the truck lights shining in the bottoms and looked around for tracks with our flashlights. We started to look for footprints. The ground was dry and covered with leaves, but we did find large scrapes going up the hill to where the car was parked. They looked like it was where the animal jumped over the hill. They were very far apart. I had to stretch as far as I could from one on the bottom to one on the top. I'm 6'4" with a 38-inch inseam. This was a large stride. This is when the whole woods went quiet again. It was nuts. 5 pretty big guys all standing in a circle like a herd of buffalo back to back, scared. I guess none of us moved a muscle. Flashlights and guns pointed out into the dark. We listened to the dead quiet of the woods. Then all of a sudden a tree limb snaps loud and then everything gets back to normal. One by one, the frogs, crickets, owls all started making their noises again. Real strange night for sure. The next day, my brother and my friend went for a walk to the creek with buckshot in their shotguns. We walked about a half a mile down the creek, spread out like we were small game hunting. We came to an area where the railroad tracks were up on the hill. My brother was at the bottom, I was in the middle, and my friend was on the end furthest from the hill. Then we heard a lot of racket and looked over to my brother. He yelled my name in a really scared voice as something was going over the hill. I remember seeing trees bending back as if they were being used to help something get up and over the top. When I got to where my brother was, he was on one knee and had his gun pointed up at the hill. I said, "What was it?" He said, "I don't know, but it was big." We found 2 marks on a real steep bank going up to the railroad tracks. I tried to climb it, but I couldn't. The marks were in the middle of the hill and at the top. Something very strong and powerful went up that hill. It had a big stride as well. The hill has about an 80% incline. Today's 5th encounter, Liberty, Texas. Me and my dog were squirrel hunting. My dog came out of the brush with his tail tucked and a deep growl. I looked to see what he was growling at and observed an animal about 4 to 5 feet tall that was looking like an orangutan that stood straight up. It was reddish-brown in color. It was 20 yards from me. When we saw each other, we both ran in opposite directions. It had to be just as afraid of me as I was of it. Even though I had a .22, I was scared. All I could think was to run. What made me just now tell this story is because of recent hoaxes in the news. These people, the hoaxers, make Bigfoot sightings unbelievable. I have told family and friends, but just get laughed at. I know what I saw and consider to be an honor to witness. I will take this to my grave. Today's sixth encounter, Montgomery County, Texas. After a lot of debate, I decided to share this encounter. My encounter happened when I was 15 years old. It was during the summer of 1981. Like usual, I was out in the woods near Old Houston Road, with friends running around tracking and fishing and just being general guys. It didn't take long to get separated from everyone. That's what happened a lot. We would all meet up back at our camp, and I had been tracking a hog, following a trail into a stand of yampons and shrubs that topped about 6 feet high or so. Once inside, I found a small clearing with grapevine and a couple of trees with low-hanging limbs. I sat down, enjoying the place, thinking this would make a great camp spot. When off to my left, I heard something move. Looking over, I froze. On the other side of the brush, looking over the top, was a head and shoulders. I remember long, shaggy hair, and a dark face with small eyes. I don't remember much else because at that point it began shaking the bush and slowly moving its way through. I did what any sensible teenager does. I ran, tearing my clothes on limbs as I drove through the low game trail. I didn't stop running till I was out of the woods and headed towards my house. The sighting took place maybe 2 miles from the San Jacinto River, in an area that backed up to a subdivision, but at the time there were 3 houses down Old Houston Road. I can say from experience that one can travel from the river to 1314 without being seen. In those days there wasn't much along the river till you got close to either I-45 or Highway 59. I don't remember any smell, and by the time I worked up the nerve to enter that part of the woods again, there were no signs of tracks. But it did appear as if something had forced its way through the brush. There was lots of broken limbs. I told only one of my friends at the time, and he helped me search for tracks, but we never found anything. Today's seventh encounter. This story is passed down through relatives that did not openly talk about it much due to the way Native Americans reserved Sasquatch and felt guilty about killing one. They especially felt guilty because this Sasquatch was believed to be more human than the average Squatch. The Celesta Indian who recounts this story makes this comment about this particular wild man. A Sankum is a word for someone born, not of the direct human, but of Sasquatch kind. This might seem like a cruel joke, something to call a human with developmental disabilities, but the honest-to-God truth may be too hard to swallow. The Sasquatch have inbred with women in the past, and the existence of these offspring has been swept under the rug and kept hidden, like the hairy man. During the 60s, it was rumored that one of the town bishops of the local church, likely a Jesuit, had taken in a freak of some sort. This freak was not human, but not animal enough to be rejected by the Jesuit. So the Jesuit was keeping him in the basement and feeding him. The only reason knowledge of this exists is because people would hear things at the church, inhuman things. If you ask me, the Jesuit did not want this thing to be out and about. This sounds somewhat unbelievable, but But keep in mind that the reason the men who shot the hairy man went a little insane is because they killed a human. A giant, ridiculously muscular human, covered with hair, but a human. Too human to parade about town in the back of a pickup truck, if you know what I mean. The Sasquatch, or the Sandcum, of this story had been particularly bold about raiding the homes when people were away and stealing their food. The account starts when the wild man was having his way, free rein. He was getting bold. He started to break into homes during the middle of the day. Children would see him and flip out. Police were called. Meetings were held. The town was becoming more and more shaken up by the presence of this unknown intruder. This was when something incredible happened to the particular family who was favorited by the hairy man. They had become so lax and accepted of the hairy man's presence that one night, while standing on the porch, the father was yanked off by his feet in full view of the entire family. They screamed and huddled together and cried while whatever it was fought with the dad on the porch. The sounds of fighting and screaming and knowing that your father was powerless against whatever it was. It must have been an unspeakable traumatic event for the kids. They are now grown up, like myself, and I wonder to this day how much this affected their lives. The father was gone for days. Whatever it was that had taken him had carried him off into the night after a struggle on the porch. There was blood on the grass, and the family grabbed neighbors and men of the community to help recover the dad. The men got together and followed the signs and trails left by whatever it was. Drops of blood and signs of something large passing through. They followed this trail all the way to the very creek which my uncle had spotted a Sasquatch at. They followed the creek all night. When the men returned the next day, they didn't speak a word. The whole group of grown men, and not one of them was willing to speak about what happened. They had, however, found the father. They recovered him. He was beaten black and blue all over his entire body, ribs broken, arms and legs broken. The father was in shock, incoherent, and couldn't speak a word. One of my uncles had gone to see the man and his family in the hospital. There was a fair amount of goodwill being shown to the family that went through this experience. Nobody knew what happened, only that the father was close to death and the family was very shaken up. So my uncle stopped by to pay his respects and saw for himself the father lying in the hospital. His eyes were bulging wide. He was trembling constantly. This man had been beaten very badly, but something else was wrong with him. He was traumatized. He died that night, and to this day nobody knows what grabbed him or what happened to him. To this day, the men who went on that recovery mission to save him kept their stories to themselves. Only a select circle, including my father, remembers these incidences. Almost nobody talks about them. Those men found what it was that had took that father. They found the hairy man and they killed it. They shot it to death with high-powered rifles and buried the bodies. The men who did this feel incredibly guilty. Sasquatch is a matter of fact here, and the older generations told us to avoid them and leave them alone because they were human beings. They are not the animals, and they are not magic. They can most certainly be monsters, and this is one of the stories that definitely corroborates that. But the hairy man, Bigfoot, is so human-like that even here, when a group of men killed one, they were so traumatized by that experience that they felt guilty of murder. Back in the 70s, there was no desire to be rich and famous for killing Bigfoot. There was no desire to even talk about Bigfoot. These kinds of things were dirty little secrets, especially on reservations. Yes, there were plenty of white kids bumping into Bigfoot and getting in the newspapers, but the native community is tight-lipped about this, even still to this day. Today's 8th encounter. Beauregard Parish, Louisiana. My family was visiting my grandmother who lived in Longville during the week of the 4th of July. There was a family that lived next door who had 2 boys about my age. My brother and sister and I, along with the boys from next door, had been shooting fireworks off all day. We had been having a bottle rocket war, shooting bottle rockets at each other. Probably why they don't sell them anymore. Anyway, we were in our teams, one boy and I on one team, and the other boy and my brother and a sister in the other. They lived on about 10 acres of land. They had a large pond on the property toward the back, kind of in the woods. So we were playing all over the property when my team ran to the other side of the pond, which was nearest to the woods. Well, we were not there very long because we heard heavy footsteps and very heavy breathing coming from behind us. I don't remember smelling anything. The area had lots of pine trees with some underbrush, and I could hear whatever coming through the brush. That is when we turned and saw it. I turned to see what was coming, thinking it was a friend of mine. I turned on the flashlight, shining it about chest high. All I saw was grayish-brown hair. I moved the light up to illuminate the face, and when I did, all I remember were 2 bright yellow eyes shining at me. That was until it blocked the light with its hands. I dropped the light and started running toward the house, screaming my head off. We were screaming and yelling so much that the other kids started to scream and yell as well. We ran back to my grandmother's house. Our parents didn't believe us. They thought we had imagined it. Today's final encounter. Rapides Parish, Louisiana. This was in the early 80s, late spring or early summer. I was still in high school, graduated in 83. My 2 brothers and I, as well as my best friend and his 2 brothers, were in a field with our 2 dogs goofing off. On the top of a hill overlooking a swamp bottom. We'd been talking about and wondering why the cattle that stay in this field never went to a certain part of the field, the area where we were looking at. We jokingly called this the Devil's Corner because of it. On this particular day, the cattle had wandered into this area and were going grazing. After about 10 or 15 minutes of sitting at the top of the hill and talking about this, we noticed that a few of the cattle looked very anxious and were looking toward the fence row that bordered the swamp area. We all started getting excited that the cows were scared of something, when all of a sudden the herd became startled and began running up the hill out of that corner in the bottom. Since we were in their path, we moved and watched them run back toward the south end of the field. Being curious, we gathered up some weapons, logs, sticks, and rocks, and decided to go see what was there, not expecting to see anything. We crossed the muddy bottom and started towards the fence row. We noticed it was extremely quiet in that corner of the field. We began to look around when we noticed some reddish hair stuck to the barbs on the fence. One of us said there was no reddish-colored cows, so why is this hair this color, and on the top 4 rows of a barbed wire fence? The fence is about 5 feet high at that point. We then heard something moving in the woods, very thick and dense with lots of thorns, where the hair was. At this time I noticed that a pine tree, roughly 5 inches in diameter, had been twisted and knocked over about 8 to 10 feet up. We hadn't had any storms recently, and no other trees were damaged. We decided we should leave. As we started to leave, the younger 4 boys got scared and threw their stuff down and began running home. But my friend and I did not. I then had a feeling like we were being watched. I asked my friend if he felt that as well, and he said, "Oh yeah." We turned toward the fence to see a face about 7 feet up, standing next to the broken tree. I asked my friend if he saw it as well, and all he could say was, We stared at each other for about 2 minutes before we ran away. What I saw were 2 eyes, a black with a gray-white color with red-orange. The top of the head was hidden by brush. The bridge of the nose was very apparent, straight, long, and narrow. The rest was hidden from view. After that, we never said anything about it again. About a month later, my friend decided he was going back in there to look around with his dog. This is the same dog that was with us the first time and acted very afraid. And this dog has chased many animals in that field. I went as far as the fence row, had the broken tree with him, but told him I was not going in there with him and that I'd wait right here for him. He said he'd be back later. After he crossed the fence, I lost sight of him, about 5 feet in. No sooner had I lost sight of him, I heard movement to the left of the spot he went in. Shortly after this, I heard him come running back to the fence row. He was yelling, "I saw it! I saw it!" He jumped the barbed wire fence in stride with his dog hot on his heels. From that day on, we never went to that area again. Later on that fall, we found a calf in the swamp that had been ripped open, and its guts were pulled out but not eaten. We passed it off as wild dogs or coyotes. Later that winter, we had snow, unusual, and again found another calf that had been the same way, but in another area of the field. We also passed this off as wild dogs. That wooded area has been since cleared and thinned with homes in there now, but the swamp is still there. It's all dried up. This swamp has access to Bayou Marie, Cedar Lake, and Red River. My parents still live there, so I visit the area several times a month. Alright guys, I hope you enjoyed today's upload. There was a bunch of great encounters. I also enjoyed the Japanese history of myth in history. Very cool. Like I said previously, I love learning about other cultures and their versions of what we have over here. I have a subscriber coming up on Thursday. I may have a subscriber tomorrow night. I'm not really sure how that's going to play out, but there will definitely be an upload every day until Thursday. So have a good day, guys. Thanks and farewell.